Hey everyone, tonight we're going to unravel one of history's most fascinating and frankly, squishiest topics. Ancient Egyptian mummification. Hmm, you're lying there, perhaps tucked into your favorite blanket. The gentle hum of the refrigerator or maybe a distant car passing by, creating a soothing backdrop. Now, imagine yourself transported back thousands of years, not to a bustling marketplace or a grand temple, but to a dim, quiet chamber filled with the scent of spices and, well, something a little less pleasant. You can almost feel the dry desert air, can't you? The dust motes dancing in a single shaft of sunlight filtering through a high window. It's a process so intricate, so deeply tied to their beliefs about the afterlife, that it shaped an entire civilization. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the actual process back then, even if you were the pharaoh. That's a reality check for your cozy evening. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening in, drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing where everyone tunes in from. And hey, if you're enjoying the slow, steady dive into history, make sure to like and follow the channel to keep up with all the exciting parts yet to come. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the dawn of Egyptian civilization, long before the pyramids of Giza touched the sky, observing the very first attempts at what would become the art of mummification. It wasn't always the grand, elaborate ritual you've seen in movies. No, initially it was far more rustic. Imagine a time when the desert itself was the primary embalmer. When someone passed away, their loved ones would simply bury them in shallow graves in the hot, dry sand. The incredible aridity of the desert, combined with the warmth, naturally desiccated the bodies. You see, the sand acted like a giant, natural dehumidifier, sucking all the moisture out of the deceased. This created a kind of accidental mummification, preserving the body in a surprisingly lifelike state, often with skin and hair intact. Think of it as nature's own jerky-making process. But for people, this accidental preservation wasn't lost on the early Egyptians. They noticed that those buried directly in the sand were often far better preserved than those placed in more elaborate, albeit poorly designed, tombs. It sparked a profound realization: if the body could be preserved, perhaps the essence of the person, their ka and bay, could live on in the afterlife. This nascent belief system that the physical form was essential for eternal existence became the bedrock of their mortuary practices. It wasn't about simply delaying decay, it was about ensuring a continuous journey for the soul. This initial observation, humble as it seems, was the spark for millennia of sophisticated embalming techniques. However, this natural mummification came with its limitations. It was unpredictable, and the desert, while a decent dehydrator, wasn't exactly a controlled environment. Sometimes the sand worked wonders, sometimes it didn't, and as their society grew more complex, so did their burial customs. They began to construct more sophisticated tombs, moving away from simple sand pits. But here's the rub: once you put a body in a coffin or a sealed chamber, away from direct contact with the drying sand, nature's mummification process pretty much stops. The body, instead of drying out, would decompose. This led to a bit of a crisis, if you can call it that. How do you ensure the afterlife when the body, the crucial vessel for the Kai and Bay, is rapidly turning to dust inside a fancy tomb? Historians still argue whether this shift to more elaborate burials directly necessitated the development of artificial mummification, or if the two evolved in parallel as their understanding of the afterlife deepened. But one thing is clear: the need for a more reliable, human-controlled method of preservation became paramount. And so the journey into the fascinating, and sometimes strangely funny, world of ancient Egyptian mummification truly began. You're about to witness humanity's ingenious and often messy, quest for immortality. So, you've seen the natural, accidental mummification that happened in the hot desert sand. It was effective, in its own primitive way. But as we discussed, once the ancient Egyptians started getting a bit more sophisticated with their burials, moving bodies from the open sand into wooden coffins or stone sarcophagi, they ran into a bit of a snag. You see, these enclosed spaces, while offering protection from scavengers, also trapped moisture. And where there's moisture, there's decay. Lots of it. Imagine the disappointment when you carefully enter a loved one in a beautifully carved wooden box, only to open it later and find, well, not much left that resembles a person. It was a disheartening realization for a people so focused on the intact body as a vessel for the afterlife. Their initial attempts to combat this newfound problem were, to put it mildly, experimental. You can almost picture the early embalmers, scratching their heads, trying to figure out how to replicate what the desert did naturally. One mainstream historical fact is that early artificial preservation methods were rudimentary. They might try to wrap the body tightly in linen soaked in resin, hoping to create a barrier against moisture. It was a logical thought, in a way, like putting a fancy airtight seal on a jar. Unfortunately, while resin might harden and create a protective shell, it didn't actually dry the body beforehand. So run what happened. The body simply decayed inside its sticky, resinous cocoon. Not quite the eternal slumber they were aiming for. Another quirky tidbit from these early days of trial and error is the evidence suggesting they might have tried some rather organic solutions. There are hints, though not definitively proven, that some early attempts involved packing the body with various substances, perhaps even some pungent herbs or plant materials, hoping they would absorb moisture or somehow magically prevent decomposition. Think of it like trying to save a soggy book by sticking it in a bag of rice, but on a much, much grander and smellier scale. You can almost hear the ancient embalmers complaining about the aroma of eternity in their workshops. Is it supposed to smell like old cabbage and despair, one might have asked? Just keep wrapping. Hemi. The pharaoh expects results. These early failures, however, were crucial learning experiences. They quickly understood that simply sealing the body wasn't enough. The internal moisture had to be removed. The body is, after all, mostly water. If you want something to last, you have to get rid of the wet stuff. This led to a gradual, incremental understanding of the anatomy and the processes of decay. They started realizing that certain parts of the body decomposed faster than others. The soft, squishy bits, the internal organs, were the first to go. This knowledge, gained through painstaking and likely unpleasant observation, paved the way for more invasive and effective techniques. Historians still argue whether the development of these techniques was driven solely by religious belief, or if a nascent understanding of rudimentary anatomy also played a significant role. It's a chicken or egg scenario with a distinctly morbid flavor. You can imagine the scene: a respected embalmer, perhaps named Imhotep Jr., standing over a deceased noble, muttering to himself, "Right, the desert dries the outside. What about the inside? If only we had a giant sponge." This period of experimentation, while not always successful, demonstrates the Egyptians' incredible ingenuity and their unwavering commitment to their core beliefs. They weren't deterred by early setbacks. Instead, they used them as stepping stones to refine their methods. These weren't just random acts. There was an underlying scientific curiosity, albeit one rooted in a spiritual quest for immortality. They were, in essence, the world's first forensic scientists, albeit with a slightly different objective. They weren't trying to solve a crime. They were trying to beat death itself. And their next big breakthrough involved a mineral that would revolutionize the entire process. No more guesswork. No more hoping the desert would do its job. They were about to take matters into their own very capable and often gloved hands, or perhaps, more accurately, their bare, natron-stained hands. You've witnessed the early, somewhat disheartening attempts at mummification, a testament to the fact that even ancient geniuses had their learning curve. They tried sealing bodies. They tried packing them with herbs. And nothing quite worked because they were missing the key ingredient, a powerful desiccant. Imagine the eureka moment, or perhaps the slow, dawning realization when they discovered natron. It wasn't some mystical, exotic substance brought from a distant land. It was right there, abundant in various wadis and desert depressions, particularly in places like Wadi al-Natron in Egypt. This wasn't some alchemist's secret. It was a naturally occurring salt mixture. A mainstream historical fact is that natron is a naturally occurring mixture of sodium, carbonate decahydrate soda ash, sodium bicarbonate baking soda, sodium chloride table salt, and sodium sulfate. This unique combination made it incredibly effective at absorbing water and inhibiting the growth of bacteria. Think of it as a superpowered blend of all the best drying agents, all in one convenient, naturally occurring package. You can picture the scene: an ancient Egyptian, perhaps experimenting with preserving fish or meat, notices how effectively this salty white substance pulls out moisture. "By the Nile," he might exclaim, "this stuff is amazing. I wonder if it works on larger, more important things." The discovery of natron was a game changer. It allowed them to move beyond the hit or miss methods of natural desert mummification and take control of the process. You're now visualizing the body being carefully laid out, not in the sand, but on a specialized embalming table, perhaps made of alabaster or wood, often with a slight incline and a drainage channel to collect any fluids. This wasn't just for neatness, it was practical, ensuring the body could effectively drain as it dehydrated. Now, for a quirky tidbit, while natron was undoubtedly the star of the show, the Egyptians weren't just sprinkling it on like fairy dust. They packed the body both internally and externally with large quantities of the granular substance. Imagine being gently but firmly filled with what feels like thousands of tiny, thirsty crystals. Every crevice, every cavity would be packed. They even placed bags of natron inside the body cavities to ensure thorough desiccation from the inside out. It's like turning the deceased into a giant, human-shaped desiccant packet. You almost wonder if they ever ran out and tried substituting it with, say, exceptionally dry sand and a prayer. "Just add more prayers. It'll be fine," I can hear a cynical assistant muttering. The process involved covering the body completely in a thick layer of natron, often for a period of up to 40 days. This wasn't a quick fix. It was a long, patient wait. During this time, the natron would slowly but surely draw out all the moisture from the tissues, preventing putrefaction and leaving behind a dehydrated, remarkably preserved form. You can almost feel the gentle crisping of the skin, the gradual shrinking of the features as the water leaves the cells. This transformation was viewed as nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the power of the gods and the skill of the embalmers. Historians still argue whether the 40-day period for natron treatment was based purely on practical observation of drying times, or if it held a deeper, symbolic religious significance, perhaps related to astronomical cycles or mythological journeys. It's likely a bit of both, as was often the case in ancient Egypt, where science and spirituality intertwined seamlessly. The discovery and systematic use of natron transformed mummification from a haphazard affair into a sophisticated, repeatable process. It was the crucial technological leap that allowed the Egyptians to truly master the art of preservation. With the body now effectively dried, the next steps involved dealing with the most challenging and, frankly, gooey parts of the process, the internal organs. And let me tell you, that's where things get really interesting, and perhaps just a little bit gross. But don't worry, you're just observing from a very safe, very distant, and very unsmelly perspective. You've seen how natron revolutionized the drying process, transforming a soggy situation into a dry, stable foundation for eternity. But before the great desiccation could begin in earnest, there was a rather crucial and surprisingly crude step: the removal of the brain. Now, when you think of the brain today, you think of the seat of consciousness intelligence, and personality. The ancient Egyptians, however, had a slightly different perspective on this particular organ. A mainstream historical fact is that the brain was generally considered to be of little importance. Unlike the heart, which they believed to be the center of intellect, emotion, and life itself, the brain was largely discarded. This might seem odd to our modern sensibilities, but for them, it was just another organ that could cause putrefaction. You can almost hear an ancient embalmer shrugging, "Meh, it's just squishy stuff. Get rid of it." So, how did they get rid of it? This is where the process gets particularly vivid and perhaps a little wince-inducing. You're observing as an embalmer approaches the deceased. They would insert a long, thin, hooked instrument, often made of bronze, up through the nostril. Yes, through the nostril. Imagine trying to thread a needle through a very narrow, very delicate passage. The hook would then be used to agitate and break up the brain tissue. Think of it like scrambling eggs, but with a lot more intent. This wasn't a gentle procedure. It was a vigorous stirring and mixing. Once sufficiently liquefied, the brain matter would then be drained out, often by turning the body onto its side or through the use of a simple probe. Sometimes, they might even rinse the cranial cavity with palm wine or water to ensure as much of the matter was removed as possible. It was undoubtedly a messy affair. For a quirky tidbit, despite the general disdain for the brain, there's evidence that sometimes in wealthier burials, they might have tried slightly more refined methods, or at least they were more thorough. There are some mummies where fragments of brain matter are still present, suggesting varying degrees of success or perhaps just different levels of care, depending on the status of the deceased or the skill of the embalmers. It wasn't a perfect science, and results varied. You can picture an apprentice, new to the job, looking utterly bewildered. "Are we sure this is the right hole? Master, it seems a bit tight." And the master embalmer, sighing, "Just push. Seti. Push. Pharaoh's patience wears thin, and so does my back." This method of brain removal, while effective in preventing decay in the cranial cavity, stands in stark contrast to the meticulous care given to other organs. It truly highlights their very specific beliefs about the afterlife and what was truly essential for survival in the duat. The heart, as we'll get to, was always left in place or carefully returned if accidentally removed, because it was believed to be the seat of intelligence and where the individual's conscience and memories resided. It was the crucial organ needed for judgment by Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths. The brain, on the other hand, was just filler, essentially. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' lack of regard for the brain stemmed purely from practical observation of decay, or if it was deeply rooted in a religious belief system that emphasized the heart as the sole locus of identity and consciousness, making the brain utterly irrelevant for the afterlife. It's a fascinating philosophical and anatomical debate, all played out with a bronze hook. So, with the brain now, shall we say, uninstalled, the embalmers could move on to the next major task dealing with the rest of the squishy bits, because while the brain was discarded, the other internal organs, particularly the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver, were considered vital for the deceased's continued existence in the afterlife. And unlike the brain, these organs weren't simply thrown away. Oh no, they received their very own special treatment, preparing them for their eternal journey alongside their owner. Now that the brain, that rather unappreciated organ, has been dealt with, you're ready to observe the more intricate and, frankly, vital stage of the mummification process, the removal and preservation of the internal organs. This wasn't just about preventing decay. It was about ensuring the deceased had all their necessary equipment for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that to truly live on, one needed their full physical self, or at least a carefully preserved version of it. A mainstream historical fact is that the major internal organs, specifically the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver, were carefully removed through an incision, usually made on the left side of the abdomen. Imagine the precision required. This wasn't a hack job. Embalmers were highly skilled professionals. They would make a clean cut, typically with a flint knife, a rather sharp tool made from stone, which was considered ritually pure. This initial incision was often quite small, just enough to allow access to the cavities. They'd then reach in, carefully extracting each organ. It was a delicate dance of hands inside the body cavity, ensuring nothing was missed and everything was handled with the utmost respect. Despite the inherent messiness, once removed, these organs weren't simply discarded like the brain. Oh no, they received their own special mummification treatment. Each organ would be thoroughly cleaned, often with palm wine and spices, to further sterilize and perfume them. Then they would be dried using natron, just like the body. Sometimes they were individually wrapped in small linen bundles. This meticulous care highlights the profound belief in the afterlife and the necessity of these specific organs for the deceased's continued existence. You can almost hear an embalmer's quiet reverence as he cleans a liver, knowing its importance in the great cosmic journey. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. While the standard practice was to remove these four organs, archaeological evidence occasionally shows variations. Sometimes other organs like the kidneys might also be found removed and preserved, though this was less common. This suggests that while there was a standardized procedure, there might have been slight deviations based on the specific embalmer's practices, the era, or even the desires of the family if they were particularly wealthy. It wasn't always a rigid, unyielding protocol. You can imagine a slightly eccentric embalmer thinking, this spleen looks rather fine today. Let's keep it. This slight variability offers a peek into the human element of what was otherwise a highly ritualized process. Now, remember how the heart was so important? It was generally left in place within the body, as it was considered the seat of intelligence, emotion, and the spiritual essence, the very core of a person's being that would be weighed against the feather of Mayat in the afterlife judgment. However, accidents happened. Sometimes, in the process of extracting the other organs, the heart might be inadvertently removed. In such cases, it was meticulously cleaned, preserved, and then carefully reinserted into the body, sometimes even placed in a specific cavity carved out just for it. This reinforces its supreme importance. Historians still argue whether the occasional removal and reinsertion of the heart was a common mistake easily rectified, or if it indicates a more nuanced understanding among some embalmers about its physical fragility while still acknowledging its spiritual significance. It's a testament to their dedication that they would go to such lengths to ensure this vital organ was in its proper place. With the body cavities now empty of their perishable contents and the crucial internal organs prepared for their own journey, the stage was set for the next, equally important step, securing these precious internal organs in their eternal resting places. The canopic jars. These wasn't just fancy pottery, they were sacred vessels, each guarded by a specific deity, ready to accompany the deceased on their transition to the afterlife. It was, in essence, their personalized luggage for eternity. You've just witnessed the careful extraction and initial preservation of the vital internal organs. Now, these isn't just going to be tossed into a baggie and called a day. Oh no, for the ancient Egyptians, these organs were far too precious, too integral to the deceased's eternal journey, to be treated so casually. This is where the beautifully crafted canopic jars enter the scene, not just as fancy containers, but as spiritual guardians. A mainstream historical fact is that the four major internal organs, the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver, were each placed in their own specific canopic jar. These jars weren't just decorative, they were highly symbolic. Each one was topped with a stopper carved in the likeness of one of the four sons of Horus, who were believed to protect the organs. Imagine four watchful deities, each standing guard over a vital part of your being, ensuring its safe passage to the afterlife. It's like having divine security for your inner workings. You're now seeing the embalmers carefully placing the preserved organs into their designated jars. First, there's Duamutf, who had the head of a jackal. He was the protector of the Rayri stomach. Think of him as the guardian of digestion, ensuring your eternal meals are well received. Next, Kabesinuf, with the head of a falcon, he protected the heat intestines. He was responsible for keeping your inner coils in order for eternity, ensuring smooth passage, so to speak. Then came Ashturji Wapamachanam, depicted with the head of a baboon. He guarded the lungs. He was the keeper of breath, ensuring your ability to respire even beyond life. And finally, Imsidiamu, Nuri, unique among his brothers as he had a human head, he was the protector of the Yiu, liver. He ensured the vital cleansing organ was secure for the arduous journey ahead. This meticulous assignment of organs to specific deities highlights the Egyptians' deep understanding of symbolic protection. It wasn't just about putting things in jars. It was about invoking divine power to safeguard these essential parts. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit about canopic jars. While the traditional setup involved 4 distinct jars, occasionally, archaeologists have found variations, especially in earlier periods or for less affluent burials. Sometimes, instead of 4 separate jars, all the organs might be placed together in a single chest or even wrapped and placed back inside the body cavity, particularly in later periods. This suggests that while the ideal was the 4 dedicated jars, practicality or evolving religious practices sometimes led to alternative solutions. You can almost imagine a budget-conscious family asking, "Couldn't we just get one big jar? It's for eternity." After all, who's going to check or an embalmer on a busy day thinking, "All right, all in one go." Efficiency is key for the afterlife. The canopic jars themselves were made from various materials, depending on the wealth of the deceased. For pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, they might be crafted from fine alabaster, limestone, or even faience, often exquisitely decorated with hieroglyphs and vibrant colors. For those of more modest means, pottery or wood might suffice. Regardless of the material, their purpose remained the same: to house and protect the vital organs. Historians still argue whether the specific animal heads assigned to each son of Horus were chosen for purely symbolic reasons related to their perceived characteristics, or if there was some lost myth or narrative that explicitly linked them to their respective organs. It's a fascinating question of iconography and belief. With the internal organs safely ensconced in their sacred vessels, the body itself, now empty of its most perishable contents and having undergone the brain-draining procedure, was ready for the most crucial stage of all: the long, slow, and thoroughly effective drying process using natron. The canopic jars would be placed near the mummy in the tomb, ready to reunite their contents with the deceased in the afterlife, ensuring a complete and functional body for eternity. It's a testament to their unwavering belief that no part of the journey to the afterlife, no matter how small or squishy, was left to chance. You've seen the meticulous handling of the internal organs and their careful placement into the watchful canopic jars. Now, the body itself, having been emptied of its most perishable contents, is ready for its grand transformation. This is the U-drying phase, the most crucial and longest part of the entire mummification process, where the magic of natron truly comes into its own. A mainstream historical fact is that the body, now thoroughly cleansed internally with palm wine and spices, would be completely covered and packed with natron. Imagine lying on a specialized embalming table, perhaps made of stone or wood, with drainage channels to allow any remaining fluids to escape. The embalmers would meticulously heap piles of granular natron over every inch of your body. Your skin, once soft and pliable, would slowly begin to feel the dehydrating power of this mineral salt. This wasn't a sprinkle, it was a deep, comprehensive burial in the stuff. Bags of natron were also often placed inside the body cavity, where the organs once were, to ensure thorough desiccation from the inside out. This created a dual-action drying process, tackling moisture from every angle. This elaborate natron bath wasn't a quick dip. The body would remain immersed in this dry, salty bed for an extended period, typically around 40 days. You can almost feel the slow, steady pull of moisture from your tissues, the gradual shrinking of your features as your body becomes lighter, more leathery. It's a silent, chemical ballet where the water molecules are drawn out, leaving behind the resilient protein structure. This specific duration of 40 days is significant. While practical observations surely played a role in determining optimal drying times, many historians still argue whether the 40-day period had an additional deeper, symbolic or religious meaning, perhaps tied to astronomical cycles, purification rituals, or mythological narratives about the journey of the soul. It's a fascinating blend of ancient science and spiritual belief. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, it's worth noting that sometimes, to speed up the process or to enhance the drying, embalmers might have even used heated stones or charcoal near the body, though direct evidence for this is scarce and debated. Imagine the meticulous monitoring involved, checking the body's progress, perhaps replenishing the natron if it became too saturated with moisture. It wasn't just a set it and forget it operation. You can almost hear the chief embalmer peering over his spectacles, sniffing the air. Aha, still a bit moist around the ankles. SETI, more natron. We don't want any unfortunate replumping incidents in the afterlife, do we? The goal was to remove approximately 75% of the body's moisture. By the end of this 40-day period, the body would be significantly lighter, shrunken, and remarkably preserved. The skin would become taut and leathery, resembling parchment. The features, while still recognizable, would be sharper, almost skeletal. It's a dramatic transformation from a living form to a dried shell, ready for its final preparations. This desiccation was crucial because it prevented putrefaction. Without moisture, the bacteria responsible for decay simply couldn't thrive. It's the ultimate antibacterial, antifungal treatment, all natural. Once removed from the natron bed, the body would undergo a final cleaning. Any remaining natron granules would be brushed or wiped away. The internal cavity, now dry and hollow, might be loosely packed with linen, sawdust, or even aromatic resins to help restore some of the body's natural contours and provide a pleasant scent. This wasn't just for aesthetics. It added a final layer of preservation and ensured the mummy looked its best for eternity. The journey of transformation was far from over, but the most challenging part of preserving the flesh was complete. With the body now thoroughly dried and stable, the focus would shift from internal chemistry to external presentation, preparing it for its grand unveiling, piece by meticulous piece. You're about to witness the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a full-body spa treatment, minus the cucumber slices. With the body now perfectly desiccated after its 40-day natron spa, it's no longer a soggy vessel, but a remarkably preserved form, ready for its final beautification. This stage is all about anointing the body with sweet smells and restorative oils, a luxurious and important part of the mummification process, preparing the deceased for their journey through the perfumed pathways of the afterlife. A mainstream historical fact is that once the body was removed from the natron, it would be thoroughly cleaned of any remaining salt residue. Then, it would be anointed with a variety of precious oils, resins, and unguents. These weren't just for a pleasant aroma, though that was certainly a benefit. The oils, often derived from cedar, frankincense, myrrh, juniper, and various other aromatic plants, served multiple purposes. They helped to restore some suppleness to the leathery skin, making it less brittle and more pliable for the intricate wrapping process to come. More importantly, they possessed antiseptic and preservative qualities, adding an extra layer of protection against any lingering decay-causing agents. You can imagine the air in the embalming workshop, once perhaps rather pungent, now filled with these rich, exotic fragrances. It's like a luxurious aromatherapy session. But for the dearly departed, The application of these oils and resins was a ritualistic act. Embalmers would carefully rub the entire body, ensuring every surface was covered. This wasn't a quick splash. It was a slow, deliberate massage, almost a final act of care and reverence for the deceased. Sometimes molten resin was poured into the cranial cavity, through the nostril, or even into the body cavity after the organs were removed, further sealing and protecting the interior. This resin would solidify, creating a kind of internal cast, giving the mummy more rigidity and shape. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The exact recipes for these anointing oils and resins were often closely guarded secrets, passed down through generations of embalming families. While we know some of the ingredients through archaeological analysis in ancient texts, the precise ratios and preparation methods remain largely a mystery. It's likely that different embalming schools or families had their own secret sauce, much like a modern-day perfumer guarding their signature scent. You can almost hear a seasoned embalmer whispering to his apprentice, "Never tell them the amount of sacred dew of Osiris." My boy, that's our family's trade secret. This proprietary knowledge added to the mystique and value of their services. Beyond their practical preservative qualities, these fragrant substances held deep symbolic meaning. They were often associated with purification, regeneration, and divinity. Myrrh, for instance, was linked to the sun god Ra and the concept of rebirth. By anointing the body with these sacred materials, the Egyptians believed they were not only preserving the physical form, but also preparing it spiritually for its transformation and rebirth in the afterlife. It was a sensory bridge between the earthly realm and the divine. Historians still argue whether the specific types and quantities of resins used were solely dictated by their preservative properties, or if the symbolic and ritualistic significance of each ingredient held equal, if not greater, weight in their selection. It's a testament to how seamlessly the practical and the spiritual intertwined in ancient Egyptian mortuary beliefs. With the body now cleansed, dried, and beautifully scented, it had achieved a remarkable state of preservation. It was no longer merely a corpse, but a potential vessel for eternal life, a tangible link for the Ka and Bea to return to. The next stage would involve painstakingly wrapping this anointed form in countless layers of fine linen. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a crucial protective measure, safeguarding the mummy from both physical damage and spiritual threats, ensuring its integrity for millennia to come. You're about to witness the ultimate cocoon, meticulously crafted for eternity. You've watched the body transform from a perishable form into a supple, fragrant, and remarkably stable shell. Now comes the painstaking, incredibly time-consuming process that gives the mummy its iconic appearance, the hot linen wraps, layer by layer. This wasn't just a simple bandage job. It was an intricate art form, a crucial protective ritual, and a major investment in time and resources. A mainstream historical fact is that the mummified body would be wrapped in hundreds of yards, sometimes even miles, of linen bandages. These weren't all the same type of linen. You might find fine, almost sheer linen for inner layers, and coarser, thicker linen for the outer bandages. The process was meticulously systematic, often beginning with wrapping individual fingers and toes, then limbs, and finally the entire body. Each limb would be wrapped separately before being bound to the torso. This created a remarkably stable and robust package. Imagine an ancient Egyptian working with incredible patience, layer after layer, securing each strip with resin or small stitches, ensuring no part of the body was left exposed. It's like wrapping a very, very important and slightly fragrant gift for eternity. The linen strips themselves were often torn from old household textiles or specially woven for the purpose. Sometimes they were even recycled from earlier burials, though this was probably for less affluent individuals. The quality and quantity of the linen used were often indicators of the deceased's social status and wealth. A pharaoh's mummy would be swaddled in the finest, purest linen, possibly even impregnated with resins or beeswax for added protection and adhesion. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The patterns of wrapping varied significantly over different periods of ancient Egyptian history and even regionally. Some mummies show incredibly complex crisscross patterns, while others are more straightforward. In some instances, padding was used to fill out the contours of the body, particularly in the face and limbs, to give the mummy a more lifelike appearance beneath the wraps. It's almost like ancient Egyptian cosmetic surgery, but with linen and sawdust. You can envision an embalmer stepping back, head tilted, evaluating his handiwork. A bit flat here. Let's add another roll for a more robust calf. Shall we? One must look fetching for Osiris. This attention to aesthetic detail, even under layers of linen, speaks volumes about their desire for perfection in the afterlife. The purpose of these wraps went beyond mere physical preservation. They provided a sterile environment, protecting the desiccated body from insects, moisture, and physical damage. But more profoundly, they held immense symbolic and ritualistic significance. Each layer, each knot, was often accompanied by prayers, spells, and incantations intended to protect the deceased on their journey through the underworld and ensure their rebirth. The wrapping process itself was a magical act, transforming the inert body into a potent, protected vessel for the Kai and Bam. Historians still argue whether the elaborate wrapping patterns were simply practical methods for securing the body, or if they had a deeper, unspoken symbolic meaning, perhaps mirroring the winding paths of the Duat, or representing a cosmic embrace. It's a debate between practicality and mysticism woven into every thread. As the layers built up, small amulets and charms were often placed between the bandages, a final layer of protection and blessing for the deceased. These tiny treasures, imbued with magical power, would ensure safe passage and eternal well-being. With the wrapping complete, the mummy was finally taking its definitive, iconic shape, ready for the adornments that would truly mark its identity and prepare it for its eternal rest. You're now seeing the ultimate historical gift wrapping service, where the bow is literally an amulet and the recipient is hoping for eternity. You've just observed the incredible artistry of the linen wrapping, turning the desiccated body into a tightly bound, protective cocoon. But the ancient Egyptians weren't content with just physical protection. For them, the journey to the afterlife was fraught with perils, both physical and spiritual. This is where the amulets and charms will come in, tiny but mighty objects imbued with magical power, strategically placed within the mummy's layers to safeguard the deceased's eternal journey. A mainstream historical fact is that numerous amulets were placed within the linen bandages of a mummy. These weren't random trinkets. Each amulet had a specific shape, material, and purpose, designed to offer protection, promote rebirth, or ensure success in the afterlife. Imagine the embalmers meticulously slipping these small, significant objects between the layers of linen as they wrapped, ensuring their magical energies permeated the mummy. It's like adding magical airbags and a spiritual GPS to ensure a smooth trip through the underworld. One of the most common and important amulets was the one scarab beetle. This wasn't just a pretty bug. The scarab was a symbol of creation, rebirth, and the rising sun, associated with the god Khipri. Often a heart scarab, carved from a dark stone like basalt or steatite, would be placed over the deceased's heart. This particular scarab was inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, chapter 30b, which implored the heart not to bear witness against the deceased during the judgment in the Hall of Two Truths. It was essentially a legal waiver for the soul, a plea for a favorable judgment. Other popular amulets included the Muashinabharajid pillar, O-ring, symbolizing stability and the backbone of Osiris, representing endurance and strength. The Muasatiet knot, often called the knot of Isis, was a symbol of protection and life, believed to transfer the goddess Isis's protective powers to the deceased. The Wadjet eye, or Eye of Horus, was a powerful protective symbol, guarding against evil and promoting healing. Small Ankhs, the hieroglyphic sign for life, were also frequently included, wishing eternal life for the deceased. Imagine a tiny arsenal of spiritual bodyguards, each standing ready to defend against specific threats in the underworld. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The placement of these amulets wasn't always strictly according to rule. While there were general guidelines for where certain amulets should go, like the heart scarab over the heart, archaeological discoveries sometimes reveal unusual placements or combinations of amulets, suggesting that personal preference, the embalmer's tradition, or even last-minute additions by grieving family members might have played a role. You can picture a nervous family member at the last minute. Wait, Aunt Mildred always loved her cat. Do you think a tiny feline amulet would help just in case? And the embalmer, perhaps a bit exasperated but understanding, finding a spot for it. The materials used for these amulets also varied, from common faience or clay to more precious stones like carnelian, lapis lazuli, or gold, depending on the wealth of the individual. The choice of material could also be symbolic, with green stones representing regeneration and blue stones associated with the heavens. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of an amulet was believed to stem from its inherent material properties, its symbolic form, or the specific ritualistic spells uttered over it during its creation and placement. It's a debate about the interplay of matter, form, and magic. With the body now intricately wrapped and fortified with these powerful amulets, the mummy was almost ready for its final adornments. The next crucial step was to give the deceased a recognizable face, a way for the K and Ba to identify their vessel, and a striking image for those who might behold them in their eternal rest. This was the creation of the death mask, an iconic symbol of ancient Egypt's funerary art, meant to bridge the gap between the earthly realm and the divine. You've seen the mummy enveloped in layers of linen, protected by a network of powerful amulets? Now, it's time for the final touch, perhaps the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egyptian funerary art, the death mask. This wasn't just a pretty face for the deceased. It was a crucial element in their journey to the afterlife, a tangible connection for their spirit. A mainstream historical fact is that the death mask served as an idealized portrait of the deceased, providing a permanent and recognizable face for the Kai life force and Bea soul to return to. The Egyptians believed that if the preserved body were somehow damaged, the mask would serve as an alternate vessel, ensuring the continuity of the individual's identity in the afterlife. It was, in essence, a backup plan for eternity, a spiritual selfie taken for the gods. The materials and craftsmanship of death masks varied widely depending on the wealth and status of the deceased. For commoners, masks might be made from painted plaster or cartonnage layers of linen or papyrus stiffened with plaster or glue. For the elite, however, masks could be masterpieces of artistry, crafted from gold, silver, bronze, or gilded wood, often inlaid with precious stones like lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian to represent the vibrant colors of the divine. Imagine the glint of gold, the shimmer of lapis, catching the torchlight in the tomb. A dazzling display meant to awe both humans and gods. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. While many death masks depict an idealized, serene visage, some masks, particularly from earlier periods, show more individualized features, attempting to capture a closer likeness of the deceased. This suggests a subtle shift over time from a focus on individual portraiture to a more generalized, divine representation. You can almost picture an ancient artist trying to capture the slight smirk of a deceased noble, then being told, no, no, make it more eternal, less just woke up, more has achieved godhood. This tension between realism and idealism is a fascinating aspect of their art, and occasionally you'll find a mask with a slightly wonky eye or an uneven smile, suggesting the human touch and perhaps a rushed job even in such sacred objects. The creation of the death mask was a meticulous process, often undertaken while the mummification was underway. The artist would work from a death mask or a mold taken from the deceased's face, or perhaps from memory and general artistic conventions. The eyes were often depicted with dark outlines, sometimes inlaid with obsidian or quartz, giving them a piercing, watchful quality. The face was usually serene, embodying the eternal peace and divinity the deceased hoped to achieve. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the mask was functional as a spiritual placeholder, aesthetic as a symbol of wealth and status, or deeply ritualistic as part of a broader set of spells and ceremonies to animate the deceased in the afterlife. It's a debate that touches upon the very essence of Egyptian beliefs about identity and eternity. Once completed, the death mask would be placed over the mummy's head and shoulders, sometimes integrated into the outer layers of the linen wrappings, effectively becoming the face of the deceased for all eternity. With the mask in place, the mummy was finally complete, a beautifully crafted vessel ready for its final journey to its eternal home. But where would this eternal home be, and what further protections and provisions would be made for its occupant? You're about to discover the layers of protection that went beyond the body itself, ensuring the mummy's security and comfort for millennia. You've seen the mummy meticulously wrapped and adorned with its iconic death mask, a testament to the embalmer's skill and the Egyptians' profound beliefs. But this precious package needed a final, robust dwelling, one that would protect it for eternity and serve as a tangible link to the living world. This brings us to the sarcophagus, the multi-layered eternal home designed to house the mummified remains. A mainstream historical fact is that a mummy was rarely placed in just one coffin. Instead, it was often enclosed within multiple layers of sarcophagi or coffins, nested one inside the other like a set of very grand, very ornate Russian dolls. This nesting system provided increasing levels of protection and symbolic significance. The innermost coffin might be anthropoid, meaning human-shaped, mirroring the form of the mummy within and adorned with the deceased's likeness and funerary texts. These would then be placed inside larger rectangular coffins, often made of wood or stone, with the outermost layer typically being a massive stone sarcophagus. You can imagine the immense effort required to craft and transport these heavy, often exquisitely decorated containers. It wasn't just a box, it was a fortress for the afterlife. The materials used for sarcophagi varied greatly with the status of the deceased. For pharaohs and the super elite, the outermost sarcophagus might be carved from solid granite, quartzite, or even alabaster, weighing many tons. The inner coffins could be made of gilded wood, plastered and painted linen cartonnage, or, in the case of Tutankhamun, even solid gold. For commoners, simpler wooden coffins, often painted, would suffice. The wealthier the deceased, the more elaborate and numerous the layers of protection. It was the ultimate status symbol, even in death. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some sarcophagi and coffins were designed with false doors or eyes painted on the inside, particularly on the eastern side facing the rising sun. This was believed to allow the soul of the deceased to exit and re-enter the tomb freely, to observe the world outside, and to participate in the rebirth cycle of the sun. Imagine being sealed away for eternity, but still having a little peek hole to catch the morning rays. You can almost hear a ghostly whisper from within, just checking if the Nile still flows. Darling, and perhaps if anyone remembered to leave more offerings, this detail highlights the nuanced belief that even in death, a connection to the living world and its cycles was important for regeneration. The decoration of these coffins and sarcophagi was incredibly rich with religious iconography and funerary texts. Hieroglyphs covered every available surface, detailing spells and prayers from texts like the pyramid texts, coffin texts, or the Book of the Dead. These inscriptions were not merely decorative, they were vital instructions and protective incantations designed to guide the deceased through the underworld, protect them from dangers, and ensure their successful rebirth. They were, in essence, the ultimate travel guide and survival manual for the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the primary function of these nested coffins was purely physical protection against tomb robbers and decay, or if their multi-layered design held a deeper symbolic meaning, perhaps mirroring the layers of the cosmos or the stages of the deceased's journey to divine status. It's a fascinating interplay between the practical and the profoundly spiritual. With the mummy now securely encased within its elaborate, multi-layered sarcophagus, It was ready for its solemn journey. The next stage involved the elaborate funerary rites and the grand procession that would carry the deceased to their eternal resting place. This wasn't just a burial, it was a performance, a public declaration of belief, and a final, grand farewell. You've followed the journey from a living body to a perfectly encased mummy, sealed within its magnificent sarcophagus. Now the quiet work of the embalmers transitions into a public display of grief, reverence, and profound spiritual belief, the one funerary rites, and from the elaborate ceremonies accompanying the completed mummy to its final resting place. This wasn't just a simple funeral, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to ensure the deceased's successful transition to the afterlife and to provide comfort and closure for the living. A mainstream historical fact is that funerary rites in ancient Egypt were complex and lengthy, involving various rituals performed over several days or even weeks. These ceremonies began once the mummification process was complete and the mummy was secured in its coffins. The family of the deceased, priests, and professional mourners would gather. Imagine the solemn atmosphere, punctuated by the rhythmic chanting of priests, the mournful cries of the professional mourners, who were often paid to express grief loudly, and the scent of incense wafting through the air. These rituals were essential for purifying the deceased, guiding their spirit, and ensuring they could interact with the gods in the afterlife. One of the most important aspects of these rites was the recitation of spells and prayers from various funerary texts, primarily the Book of the Dead. These spells were not merely recited, they were enacted, often with specific gestures and offerings. They contained instructions, passwords, and protective incantations for the deceased to navigate the dangers of the duat, the underworld. It was like a spiritual cheat sheet for the deceased, ensuring they knew all the right answers and could avoid any divine detours. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. While professional mourners were a common feature, they sometimes took their role very seriously, engaging in dramatic displays of sorrow, tearing their clothes, covering themselves in dust, and wailing loudly. This was not just for show. Their grief was believed to help guide the deceased and express the community's sorrow. You can almost hear a chief embalmer whispering to a new apprentice. Remember, SETI, the louder the wail, the happier the family feels their investment in our services was. Encourage the drama. It highlights the performative aspect of ancient Egyptian funerary culture, where emotions were both genuinely felt and ritually expressed. Offerings were a central part of these rites. Food, drink, incense, and flowers would be presented to the deceased and to the gods. These offerings were believed to sustain the Kai life force of the deceased, allowing them to partake in eternal feasts in the afterlife. The concept was that while the physical offering might decay, its spiritual essence would be consumed by the deceased. Historians still argue whether the elaborate nature of these rituals was primarily for the benefit of the deceased to aid their passage, for the living to reinforce social order and provide comfort, or for the priests to maintain their power and influence. It's a debate about the complex interplay of religious belief, social structure, and individual psychology. The culmination of these rites was often the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed just before the mummy was sealed in its tomb. This highly symbolic ritual was critical for the deceased to be able to eat, drink, speak, and see in the afterlife. With these ceremonies complete, the deceased was now fully prepared, both physically and spiritually, for their eternal journey. The next step was the grand procession, the physical movement of the sarcophagus and its precious cargo to its final, secluded resting place. A journey that was as much a spectacle as it was a solemn act. You've immersed yourself in the solemnity of the funerary rites, the chanting and offerings setting a deeply spiritual tone. But before the mummy could be sealed away, there was one absolutely critical ritual, a moment of profound symbolism, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This wasn't just a quaint tradition, it was believed to literally breathe life back into the deceased for the afterlife. A mainstream historical fact is that the opening of the mouth ceremony was performed on the mummy in its coffin, often just outside the tomb entrance. Imagine standing there, the harsh desert sun beating down, as a specially appointed priest, wearing a mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the dead, approaches the mummy. He holds a ritual adze, a tool resembling a pickaxe, or sometimes a blade, which he would touch to the mouth, eyes, nose, and ears of the mummy in the mask. This wasn't a physical violation. It was a purely symbolic act. The ritual was meant to reanimate the senses, allowing the deceased to breathe, speak, eat, drink, see, and hear in the afterlife. Without this ceremony, the deceased would be, effectively, spiritually mute and blind, unable to partake in the joys of the duat. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of plugging in the afterlife battery pack. The ceremony involved a series of intricate actions and recitations. Priests would present various ritualistic tools, touch them to the mask and body, and recite specific spells from the Book of the Dead and other funerary texts. These spells invoke deities and magical powers to restore the deceased's faculties. Sometimes, specific animal sacrifices, like an ox or a calf, would be made during the ceremony, with parts of the sacrificed animal also symbolically presented to the mouth of the mummy. The life force of the animal was believed to transfer to the deceased, further aiding in their reanimation. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. While typically performed on the mummy itself, the opening of the mouth ceremony could also be performed on statues of the deceased or even on the death mask alone. This further emphasizes the symbolic power of the ritual and the belief that the essence of the individual could be reanimated through various representations. You can picture a priest, perhaps a bit tired from all the chanting, meticulously touching the adze to a statue, thinking, right, eyes, check, mouth, check. Let's get this show on the road. Afterlife awaits. It shows their adaptability and the deep conviction that the ritual's power lay in its symbolic act, rather than strict physical interaction with the body. The spiritual significance of this ceremony cannot be overstated. It was the crucial bridge between death and eternal life. It ensured that the deceased could participate fully in the afterlife, offering praise to the gods, enjoying eternal banquets, and navigating the spiritual landscape. Without the ability to speak, for instance, how could one answer the questions posed by the divine judges, or, more importantly, how could one complain about the afterlife accommodations? Historians still argue whether the concept of the opening of the mouth ceremony originated from practical embalming techniques, such as preparing the mouth cavity that later gained religious meaning, or if it was a purely ritualistic invention from its inception, designed to fulfill a spiritual necessity. It's a debate that delves into the origins of their complex funerary beliefs. With the senses symbolically reanimated, the deceased was now fully ready to embark on their final journey to the eternal resting place. The stage was set for the grand procession, a majestic and poignant spectacle that would carry the mummy and its wealth of grave goods to the tomb, a permanent home prepared to house the now complete vessel for eternity. The air was thick with expectation, the culmination of months of meticulous work leading to this momentous occasion. You've witnessed the profound reanimation of the senses through the opening of the mouth ceremony. Now, with the deceased fully prepared for eternity, the scene shifts from the intimate rituals to a grand, public spectacle, the funeral procession. This wasn't just a simple walk to the grave. It was a carefully choreographed display of status, piety, and deep reverence, a final earthly journey before the eternal one. A mainstream historical fact is that the funeral procession was a highly organized event, involving numerous participants. Leading the procession were priests, often carrying religious standards or burning incense, clearing the path both physically and spiritually. Following them would be servants carrying the vast array of grave goods furniture, clothing, food offerings, and more, all destined to accompany the deceased into the tomb. Then came the heart of the procession, the massive, often gilded, sarcophagus containing the mummy, pulled on a large sledge by oxen or a team of men. The family of the deceased, professional mourners, and other attendants would follow, wailing, lamenting, and often casting dust on their heads as a sign of grief. Imagine the sheer scale of it, a slow, solemn parade winding its way through the landscape, drawing the attention of all who witnessed it. The route of the procession was often carefully chosen, sometimes across the Nile if the tomb was on the west bank, the land of the dead, where the sun set. Boats would be used to transport the sarcophagus and goods across the river, adding another layer of ritual and symbolism to the journey. The entire event was a public declaration of the deceased's importance and the family's wealth. But more profoundly, it was a collective act of guiding the deceased towards their final rest and ensuring their safe passage to the afterlife. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Sometimes, during the procession, a lector priest would walk ahead, reciting spells from papyrus rolls to ensure safe passage and ward off evil spirits. It's like having a spiritual GPS with a built-in exorcism function. You can almost hear him mumbling, "Turn right at the sacred sycamore. Beware of the grumpy demon of the crossroads. And for the love of Osiris, don't forget the proper incantation for the desert jackals." This highlights the pervasive belief in unseen dangers that needed active magical intervention. Another interesting, though less common, practice was the inclusion of small, symbolic wooden boats in the procession, even if the tomb wasn't by water, to represent the deceased's journey across the cosmic waters of the underworld. The atmosphere of the procession was a complex mix of somber grief and hopeful anticipation. While the wails of the mourners were genuine, there was also an underlying belief that this journey was a necessary step towards eternal bliss. The procession was not just about saying goodbye, it was about facilitating a rebirth. The presence of priests, the burning incense, and the recitation of spells all served to purify the path and consecrate the journey. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the public display of wealth and grief during the funeral procession was to honor the deceased, to reinforce social hierarchies among the living, or to actively deter tomb robbers by demonstrating divine protection and the community's watchfulness. It's a fascinating question of social signaling versus genuine spiritual intent. Finally, the procession would arrive at the tomb, the carefully chosen and prepared eternal dwelling. This was the moment of final separation from the living world, the gateway to the underworld. With the mummy and its precious cargo now at the threshold of its eternal home, the next crucial step was the secure placement of everything within the tomb, ensuring the deceased's everlasting peace and provision. The ultimate closing of the door was just moments away. You followed the grand funeral procession, witnessing the solemn journey of the sarcophagus to its final destination. Now, at the very threshold of eternity, comes the meticulous and crucial act of tomb placement, ensuring the mummy, its canopic jars, and all the accompanying grave goods are meticulously arranged in their designated spots within the prepared eternal dwelling. This wasn't just about putting things away. It was about orchestrating a perfectly arranged afterlife. A mainstream historical fact is that Egyptian tombs, especially those of pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, were far more than simple burial chambers. They were complex structures designed to protect the deceased and provide all the necessary provisions for their existence in the afterlife. Imagine stepping inside. The tomb often consisted of multiple rooms and passages, an antechamber for offerings, a burial chamber for the sarcophagus, and sometimes additional rooms for grave goods or even false burial shafts to deter robbers. The placement of the sarcophagus, often in a central, highly secured location, was paramount. It was carefully maneuvered into position, sometimes requiring ramps and a great deal of human power, before being sealed. The orientation of the tomb and the mummy within it was also highly significant. Mummies were typically laid out with their heads toward the north, aligning with the circumpolar stars, which were associated with eternity and rebirth. This celestial alignment was believed to aid the deceased soul in its journey through the cosmos. You can almost feel the sacred geometry at play, every angle and position meticulously calculated for spiritual efficacy. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some tombs incorporated soul shafts or escape routes, not for the physical mummy, but for the soul or personality to exit and re-enter the tomb, allowing it to interact with the living world and the daily cycle of the sun. These shafts were often incredibly narrow, sometimes only large enough for a small bird to pass through, reinforcing their spiritual rather than physical purpose. You can imagine the bay of a curious pharaoh thinking, "Ah, finally, a fresh breeze. I hope they remembered to water the garden outside." This blend of physical permanence and spiritual mobility is a fascinating aspect of their afterlife beliefs. The sealing of the tomb was the final, irreversible act, severing the physical connection to the living world. Passageways were blocked with large stone slabs, sometimes disguised, and the entrance was often hidden and sealed with plaster, bearing the seal of the necropolis or the deceased's name. This wasn't just about deterring robbers, though that was certainly a concern, as we'll discuss later. It was a ritualistic act of closure, marking the transition of the deceased from the earthly realm to the divine. Historians still argue whether the elaborate security measures in tombs were primarily a practical response to the persistent threat of tomb robbery, or if they held a deeper, magical significance in themselves, designed to ritually seal the deceased off from earthly influences and ensure their peaceful repose until rebirth. It's a debate between pragmatic protection and ritualistic power. With the tomb sealed, the mummy and its treasured possessions were now truly in their eternal home, a secure sanctuary meant to last for millennia. But what exactly were these grave goods? What provisions did the ancient Egyptians believe were necessary for a comfortable and prosperous afterlife? You're about to discover the incredible array of items that accompanied the deceased, transforming their tomb into a veritable second home, ready for endless existence. You've just witnessed the meticulous sealing of the tomb, the final earthly act for the deceased. But a tomb wasn't just a place for the mummy. It was meant to be a fully stocked eternal residence, ready for every conceivable need in the afterlife. This brings us to the fascinating array of grave goods, the afterlife essentials buried with the deceased to ensure their comfort, status, and sustenance in the duat. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians believed the afterlife was a continuation of earthly life, albeit in a perfected form. Therefore, the deceased would need all the possessions, comforts, and provisions they enjoyed while alive. Imagine an entire household being transported into the tomb. This included everything from furniture beds, chairs, chests, clothing, jewelry, cosmetics, and toiletries, to games, musical instruments, and even chariots or boats for the elite. For commoners, the grave goods would be simpler, perhaps just a few pottery vessels and personal adornments. But the principle remained the same: provision for eternity. Food and drink were absolutely essential. Pottery vessels filled with grain, bread, meat, fruits, and wine would be placed in the tomb to nourish the deceased's ka life force. While the physical food would decay, its spiritual essence was believed to be consumed by the deceased. It was like having an eternal pantry, constantly replenished by spiritual offerings. You can almost picture a mummy, spiritually feasting on spectral grapes and phantom roast duck, truly living it up in the afterlife. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some tombs have revealed incredibly specific or even odd grave goods. For instance, in some burials, archaeologists have found ancient board games like Senet, complete with playing pieces. This suggests the deceased intended to pass their eternal leisure time with familiar pastimes. You can almost hear a ghostly groan from within a sarcophagus. Oh no, not another round of Senet with Aunt Nephthys. She always cheats. This personal touch offers a delightful glimpse into the individuality of their beliefs and daily lives. Another interesting finding is the inclusion of gardening tools for certain individuals, implying that even eternal leisure might involve some cosmic horticulture. The value and quantity of grave goods were a clear indicator of the deceased's social status and wealth. A pharaoh's tomb, like that of Tutankhamun, would be overflowing with treasures, solid gold effigies, elaborate thrones, intricate jewelry, and countless other priceless artifacts. For someone of humbler means, their grave goods might consist of a few simple ceramic pots, a wooden comb, and perhaps a favorite piece of jewelry. But regardless of wealth, the intent was the same: to equip the deceased for a comfortable and prosperous existence beyond the veil. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for bearing such immense wealth with the dead was purely religious to ensure divine favor and comfort, economic to remove wealth from circulation and preserve family lineage, or social to display power and status even in death. It's a fascinating interplay of belief, economy, and social structure. With the tomb stocked with everything from food to furniture, the deceased was truly set up for eternity. But what about the endless chores and tasks that even an afterlife might bring? Who would perform the mundane duties while the deceased enjoyed their eternal leisure? That's where a particularly fascinating group of grave goods comes in, an army of miniature servants ready to spring to life at the deceased's command. You're about to meet the Shabti dolls, the ultimate celestial workforce. You've explored the vast array of grave goods, from grand furniture to eternal provisions, all designed to make the afterlife a comfortable continuation of earthly existence. But even in paradise, who handles the grunt work? Who tills the fields of the field of reeds, or clears the cosmic canals? The ancient Egyptians had a brilliant and rather charming solution. The Shabti dolls, Uri, a miniature army of servants ready to leap to action at their master's command. A mainstream historical fact is that Shabti or Ushabti dolls were small, mummiform figures placed in tombs, specifically designed to act as substitutes for the deceased in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that in the field of reeds, the blissful paradise, individuals would still be called upon by the gods to perform manual labor, like farming or maintaining the irrigation canals. To avoid this eternal toil, the deceased would simply call upon their Shabti to do the work for them. Imagine hitting the cosmic snooze button every time a divine chore popped up, knowing your miniature stand-in would handle it. These figures varied in size from a few inches to over a foot tall, and were typically made from faience, a glazed ceramic, wood, or stone. They were often inscribed with a specific spell, Shabti spell 6 from the Book of the Dead, which commanded them to answer when the deceased was called upon for labor. The inscription would often read something like, O Shabti, if name of deceased is summoned to do any work which is to be done in the afterlife. You shall say, Here I am. It was the ultimate call, a subordinate magical item. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The number of Shabtai dolls found in tombs varied enormously. A commoner might have only a handful, or even just one, but wealthy individuals and pharaohs often had hundreds, sometimes even one for each day of the year, plus overseer Shabtis to manage them. Imagine opening a tomb and finding an entire miniature workforce, neatly lined up, ready for eternal deployment. You can picture a pharaoh, contemplating his afterlife duties. Right? 365 days of farming? No, too much effort. Get me 365 Shabtis and a few foremen, just in case they unionize. This reflects a fascinating mix of practicality and magical thinking. Some even had tiny tools painted or carved onto them, like hoes and baskets, further reinforcing their role as laborers. The Shabti concept reveals a deep-seated desire to avoid manual labor, even in the blissful afterlife. It underscores the Egyptian belief that while the afterlife was a place of eternal joy, it wasn't entirely free of responsibility. But with enough Shabtis, one could truly kick back and enjoy the eternal banquet. Historians still argue whether the Shabti's purpose was primarily practical to avoid labor, symbolic to represent the deceased's eternal subservience to the gods, or purely an expression of wealth and status, showing off how many servants one could afford even after death. It's a debate about the blend of spiritual necessity and earthly aspirations. With the Shabti army in place, ready to handle any celestial chores, the tomb was truly complete for its human occupant. But the ancient Egyptians didn't just reserve mummification for people. Their deep connection to animals, both as pets and as divine manifestations, led to another fascinating branch of mummification, the preservation of creatures great and small. You're about to discover a whole new world of eternal companions and sacred offerings. From cats to crocodiles, you've seen the extraordinary efforts made to preserve humans for the afterlife, complete with their Shabti workforce. But the ancient Egyptians' reverence for life extended far beyond their own species. Their world was intertwined with animals, both as beloved companions and as manifestations of the divine. This brings us to a particularly fascinating and sometimes unexpectedly humorous aspect of their mortuary practices: animal mummification. The preservation of creatures great and small. A mainstream historical fact is that millions of animals were mummified in ancient Egypt. This practice fell into broadly two categories: the mummification of pets and the mummification of sacred animals offered to deities. Pet mummies, usually cats, dogs, monkeys, and even gazelles, were often buried with their owners, intended to join them in the afterlife. Imagine the comfort of knowing your furry friend would be waiting for you in the field of reeds, ready for an eternal belly rub. These were often meticulously prepared, reflecting the affection their owners held for them. The sheer scale of sacred animal mummification, however, is truly staggering. Pilgrims would purchase mummified animals as votive offerings to specific gods. For instance, cats were sacred to the goddess Bastet, ibises to Thoth, and crocodiles to Sobek. Vast catacombs have been discovered filled with millions of these mummified creatures, each representing a prayer or an act of devotion. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit tunnel, the air thick with history, and realizing you're surrounded by countless wrapped and preserved animals, from tiny shrews to massive bulls. It's a testament to the pervasive nature of their religious practices. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. While many of these sacred animal mummies contain the actual animal, some have been found to contain only a few bones, feathers, or even just dirt or reeds. This has led to scholarly debate about whether some of these were fakes or if the intention was more symbolic than literal. Perhaps due to demand outstripping supply, or a belief that the spiritual essence was enough. You can almost hear an ancient animal mummy vendor in a bustling market, quickly wrapping up some straw and a stray feather, finest ibis mummy, fresh from the sacred swamps. Guaranteed eternal blessings, only 3 coppers. This certainly adds a touch of ancient entrepreneurial spirit to the sacred. It suggests that, for some, the ritual act of offering was more important than the actual contents. The mummification techniques for animals varied, ranging from simple drying and wrapping for mass-produced votive offerings to highly elaborate processes for important sacred animals or beloved pets. Some animals, like the sacred apis bulls, receive mummification on par with royalty, complete with elaborate sarcophagi and burial chambers. This indicates the profound respect and reverence the Egyptians held for these creatures, seeing them as living embodiments of divine power. Historians still argue whether the widespread practice of animal mummification was primarily a form of religious devotion and offering, an economic enterprise driven by demand from pilgrims, or a combination of both, reflecting the deep integration of animals into daily life and spiritual belief. It's a debate that touches on everything from ancient economics to animal welfare in a very unique context. From the grandiosity of pharaohs to the humblest cat, mummification was a central tenet of Egyptian life, demonstrating their profound belief in continuity beyond death. But all this meticulous work, all these materials, all these skilled professionals, it wasn't cheap. You're about to discover the intricate economics of eternity, how the cost of mummification created a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots. Even in death, you've explored the fascinating world of human and animal mummification, a testament to the ancient Egyptians' profound beliefs. But all this meticulous work, the natron, the oils, the linen, the amulets, the canopic jars, the coffins, the grand tombs, was a highly specialized industry. And like any industry, it came with a price tag. You're about to discover the cost of mummification and how it created a clear class divide, even in death. A mainstream historical fact is that mummification was an expensive and time-consuming process, meaning that a full, elaborate mummification was largely reserved for the wealthy elite pharaohs, nobles, high-ranking officials, and powerful priests. Imagine the resources required: skilled embalmers, large quantities of natron, fine linens, imported resins, and precious materials for masks and coffins. This wasn't a do-it-yourself project for the average person. For the truly affluent, the cost could be astronomical, reflecting not just a desire for eternal life, but also a continuation of their earthly status and wealth. It was the ultimate luxury package for the afterlife. Herodotus, the Greek historian writing centuries after the height of mummification, famously described three different price tiers for mummification, ranging from the most expensive and thorough to the cheapest and simplest. The most expensive method involved the full works: brain removal, evisceration, 70 days of processing, natron drying, anointing with costly resins, and meticulous wrapping, followed by elaborate coffins and grave goods. This was the Rolls-Royce of mummification, ensuring the best possible chance for an intact afterlife. The middle-tier method was significantly less costly. Herodotus describes it as involving injecting cedar oil into the body to dissolve the internal organs, which would then be drained, along with the liquefied body fat. The body would still be treated with natron, but the process was simpler and less invasive. While less preserved than the top tier, it was still a recognizable form of mummification. The cheapest method, one, was a bare-bones approach. Herodotus says it involved purging the intestines and then simply salting the body with natron for 70 days, with no further internal removal or elaborate preparations. This was essentially natural desiccation, aided by salt, without any of the fancy trimmings. For the very poorest, a simple burial in the desert sand, allowing for natural desiccation, might have been the only option. Much like the earliest practices we discussed, here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The middle-tier method described by Herodotus, involving cedar oil injections to dissolve organs, has been a source of much scholarly debate. While some archaeological evidence supports variations in methods, the precise mechanism Herodotus described has been difficult to confirm entirely through scientific analysis of mummies. It's possible he either misunderstood some aspects or that this method was less common than he implied. You can almost hear a modern Egyptologist scratching their head: cedar oil dissolves. What? Now maybe he just saw a really runny mummy and took notes. This highlights the challenge of relying solely on ancient texts for detailed technical information, especially from an outside observer. The class divide in death was a stark reality. While everyone hoped for an afterlife, the quality of their eternal existence, or at least the quality of their eternal vessel, was directly linked to their earthly wealth. This meant that while the pharaohs and nobles would have beautifully preserved bodies in grand tombs, the majority of the population would have less perfect mummies or simply natural desert burials. Historians still argue whether the economic stratification of mummification primarily reinforced social hierarchies in life, or if it genuinely reflected a belief that the quality of one's mummification directly impacted one's standing and capabilities in the afterlife. It's a debate about the practical realities of a specialized industry versus deeply held spiritual beliefs. Regardless of the tier, the practice of mummification was a cornerstone of Egyptian society, supporting an entire industry of skilled professionals. You're about to step inside these bustling mummification workshops, places where the grim realities of death met the intricate artistry of preservation, all in the name of eternity. You've seen the significant financial investment required for a proper mummification, highlighting the stark class divisions, even in death. This complex, multi-stage process wasn't carried out in people's living rooms. Oh no. It required specialized spaces and a dedicated workforce. You're about to step into the bustling and perhaps slightly eerie world of mummification workshops, places where the grim realities of death met the intricate artistry of preservation, all in the name of eternity. A mainstream historical fact is that mummification was a highly specialized trade, performed in dedicated workshops often located near cemeteries or temples, usually on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead. These workshops, sometimes called the Wabati Purification Place or Pernefer House of Beauty, were not just a single room but a complex of areas. Imagine a series of practical spaces, one for the initial washing and evisceration, another for the natron drying, and then separate areas for anointing and wrapping. They were functional, designed for efficiency, and probably had very good ventilation, or at least you'd hope so, given the nature of the work. These workshops were staffed by a hierarchy of individuals. At the top was the chief embalmer, a highly respected figure, often a priest, who oversaw the entire process and performed the most sacred rituals. Below him were skilled embalmers, artisans, and apprentices who carried out the detailed work of disembowelment, drying, and wrapping. There were also specialists in coffin making, mask creation, and amulet crafting, all working in concert. It was a well-oiled machine, so to speak, dedicated to guiding the deceased to the afterlife. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The tools of the embalmer were surprisingly varied and sometimes quite simple, from flint knives for incisions considered ritually pure to bronze hooks for brain removal, spatulas, funnels for pouring resins, and various needles for stitching. You can almost imagine an ancient embalmer's tool belt, filled with an array of implements that would make a modern surgeon wince. They weren't using sterile stainless steel. They were working with what was available, relying on natural antiseptics like palm wine and resins. And sometimes these workshops smelled quite strongly of frankincense and myrrh, mingled with the less pleasant odor of, well, you know. An apprentice might quip, "Master, I think I've perfected the blend of myrrh and eau de deceased." The embalmers were not just technicians. They were ritual specialists. Every step of the mummification process was imbued with religious significance, accompanied by prayers, incantations, and specific ceremonial acts. The chief embalmer often wore a mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, embodying the deity during the sacred rites. This blended the practical with the profound, turning a gruesome task into a spiritual journey. Historians still argue whether the practical skills of embalming developed first, with the rituals added later, or if the religious beliefs about preservation spurred the development of the technical skills from the very beginning. It's a chicken or egg question about the origins of this unique ancient profession. These workshops were not just centers of mortuary practice. They were significant economic hubs, employing many people and consuming vast quantities of materials. They were vital components of the ancient Egyptian economy and social structure, demonstrating how central the belief in the afterlife was to their daily lives. With the deceased now fully prepared and sealed away, securely placed in their tomb, one might think the story ends there. But unfortunately, the allure of wealth, even in death, proved too strong for some. You're about to delve into the darker side of this history, the unpleasant reality of tomb robbing, a constant threat to the eternal rest of the mummies. You've had a peek inside the bustling mummification workshops, where skilled hands meticulously prepared bodies for eternity. The deceased, now perfectly preserved and enshrined in a grand tomb filled with treasures, should, in theory, enjoy an undisturbed eternal slumber. Unfortunately, the allure of untold wealth proved too strong for many throughout history. You're now confronting the unpleasant reality of robbing tombs, a persistent and often violent threat to the eternal rest of the mummies and their precious grave goods. A mainstream historical fact is that tomb robbing was a widespread and persistent problem throughout ancient Egyptian history. From the earliest dynasties right through to Roman times, despite elaborate security measures, hidden entrances, false passages, and even curses inscribed on tomb walls, the promise of gold, jewels, and valuable artifacts was a powerful motivator for desperate individuals or organized gangs. Imagine the immense effort put into securing a tomb, only for a group of determined thieves to spend weeks, months, or even years meticulously tunneling their way in. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game between tomb builders and tomb robbers. The motivations for tomb robbing were primarily simple greed and economic desperation. Egypt's wealth, concentrated in the tombs of its pharaohs and elite, was an irresistible target. Robbers would often work under the cover of darkness, sometimes even bribing tomb guards or using their insider knowledge. When a tomb was successfully breached, the scene was often one of utter devastation. Sarcophagi smashed, mummies unwrapped and desecrated in the search for hidden jewels or amulets within the bandages, and grave goods scattered or carried away. The spiritual implications of such desecration, for the Egyptians, were horrific, threatening the deceased's ability to achieve or maintain their afterlife. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some tomb robbers, particularly in later periods when the practice was rampant, even developed sophisticated techniques, including using mummy saws to quickly cut through layers of bandages in search of hidden treasures. They weren't exactly gentle. You can almost hear a seasoned tomb robber giving advice to a novice. Remember, SETI, always check between the legs for that golden ankh, and mind the desiccated eyeballs. They tend to pop. This brutal efficiency highlights the commercialized nature that tomb robbing sometimes took on, far removed from any sense of respect for the dead. There are even historical records of trials for tomb robbers, detailing their confessions and the gruesome fate of those caught. The scale of tomb robbing was so severe that it led to desperate measures. In the New Kingdom, during the 21st dynasty, priests took extraordinary steps to protect the royal mummies. They secretly reburied many pharaohs, including Seti I and Ramesses IX, in a hidden cachette at Deir el-Bahari, moving them multiple times to keep them safe from persistent thieves. This wasn't just practical protection, it was an act of profound spiritual urgency, trying to ensure the continued afterlife of their revered rulers. Historians still argue whether the scale of tomb robbing indicates a fundamental flaw in the Egyptian belief system regarding the sanctity of the tomb, or if it simply reflects the timeless human struggle between reverence for the dead and the allure of wealth in times of hardship. It's a debate about the resilience of belief against the pressures of human nature. While the actions of ancient tomb robbers were driven by very real economic forces, they eventually gave rise to a whole new layer of mystique around mummies, especially in later centuries. The disturbed tombs and desecrated remains, combined with a healthy dose of imagination, fueled the creation of popular myths and chilling tales. You're about to explore the enduring legend that emerged from this dark reality, that a mummy's curse, a fascinating blend of historical reality and sensationalized fiction that captured the public imagination. You've explored the stark reality of ancient tomb robbing, a far cry from the serene image of eternal rest. This tangible desecration, combined with a healthy dose of Western exoticism and media sensationalism, laid the groundwork for one of the most enduring myths in popular culture, the mummy's curse. This isn't ancient history, but a fascinating modern phenomenon born from disturbed tombs and vivid imaginations. A mainstream historical fact is that the idea of a mummy's curse gained widespread public attention primarily in the early 20th century, following the highly publicized discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon. After Carnarvon's death, just a few months after the tomb's opening, supposedly from a mosquito bite that became infected after he nicked it shaving, rumors of a curse began to spread like wildfire. Journalists, eager for a sensational story, linked every subsequent misfortune of anyone connected to the excavation to the mummy's wrath. It was the original viral conspiracy theory, a thrilling blend of the exotic and the macabre. The supposed curse was never actually inscribed on Tutankhamun's tomb, nor was it a widespread belief in ancient Egypt in the way it's portrayed in popular media. While ancient Egyptians certainly placed protective spells and warnings against desecration on tombs, these were more about ensuring the deceased's eternal peace and deterring robbers with divine punishment, rather than predicting specific, dramatic deaths for those who disturbed them. The concept of a mummy rising from its tomb to exact revenge is a purely modern invention, designed to thrill and entertain. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit about the curse. Many of the supposed victims of the curse actually lived long and healthy lives after participating in the excavation. Howard Carter himself lived for another 16 years, dying of lymphoma at the age of 64, a fairly respectable age for the time. Other individuals involved in the discovery also lived to old age. The curse was often attributed to mundane illnesses or accidents, twisted by the press into supernatural events. You can almost imagine a reporter, desperate for a headline, declaring, "Man stubs toe, mummy's revenge for dusty sarcophagus." It highlights the power of narrative and human desire for mysterious explanations, even for everyday occurrences. And let's be honest, working in dusty, confined ancient tombs probably exposed excavators to all sorts of mold and bacteria, which could easily explain some illnesses. The popularity of the mummy's curse led to a surge in mummy-themed horror movies, books, and comics, firmly embedding the vengeful, reanimated mummy into Western popular culture. These fictional portrayals, often featuring slow-moving, bandage-wrapped monsters, became a staple of the horror genre, far removed from the actual ancient Egyptian beliefs. Historians still argue whether the invention and popularity of the mummy's curse reflected a Western subconscious guilt over colonialism and the disturbing of ancient graves, or simply a fascination with the unknown and the exotic. It's a debate about cultural appropriation, historical sensitivity, and the enduring power of a good scary story. While the mummy's curse might be a fictional construct, the actual scientific study of mummies has revealed far more compelling and real insights than any supernatural tale. Modern archaeologists and scientists, armed with cutting-edge technology, are now able to unveil secrets from these ancient remains without disturbing their carefully preserved forms. You're about to explore how these incredible modern discoveries are peeling back the layers of time, revealing surprising details about ancient Egyptian life, death, and belief, all while respecting the deceased. You've just explored the rather thrilling, yet ultimately fictional, realm of the mummy's curse. Now, let's pivot from sensationalism to science. While Hollywood conjured reanimated monsters, real-world archaeologists and scientists were quietly, diligently, and with far more respect, making incredible modern discoveries, continually unveiling new secrets about ancient Egyptian mummification. These aren't tales of curses, but of careful excavation, innovative technology, and groundbreaking insights. A mainstream historical fact is that recent archaeological finds continue to shed new light on the nuances of mummification. For example, large caches of previously undisturbed mummies have been discovered, sometimes in ancient burial shafts in places like Saqqara. These finds aren't just about numbers. They often provide intact evidence of embalming workshops, tools, and written records that deepen our understanding of the entire process. Imagine opening a shaft that hasn't seen the light of day for thousands of years, revealing rows upon rows of perfectly preserved sarcophagi, each a time capsule waiting to be studied. It's like finding a lost library filled with untold stories of the dead. One particularly exciting area of modern discovery involves the identification of previously unknown mummification techniques or materials. For instance, recent research on specific mummies has uncovered evidence of sophisticated resin blends in embalming substances that were far more complex than previously understood. This suggests that the ancient Egyptians were master chemists and pharmacologists, constantly refining their methods. It's not just natron and linen, it's a whole pharmacopoeia of ancient preservatives. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some recent discoveries have included mummies with unusual or unexpected features. For example, archaeologists have found mummies with intricate tattoos, revealing new details about ancient Egyptian body art and its potential significance in funerary rituals. Or mummies of individuals who, despite their high status, show signs of debilitating diseases or injuries, offering a more human and relatable glimpse into their lives. You can almost hear a modern archaeologist exclaiming, "Wait, this pharaoh had a tattoo of a hippopotamus on his bicep. This changes everything." These unexpected details remind us that the ancient Egyptians were complex individuals, not just idealized figures in a tomb. Modern techniques also include the use of satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to locate undiscovered tombs and ancient settlements. Minimizing invasive digging, this allows archaeologists to map out entire necropolises from above, identifying potential sites for future excavation without disturbing the landscape. Historians still argue whether the advent of non-invasive technologies will fundamentally change the nature of archaeological excavation, shifting from extensive digging to a more selective and conservation-focused approach, thereby preserving more sites for future generations and different research questions. It's a debate about balancing discovery with preservation for the long term. These ongoing discoveries are not just fascinating tidbits. They provide invaluable data that challenges existing theories, fills in gaps in our knowledge, and paints an ever more detailed picture of ancient Egyptian society, medicine, and religious beliefs. And these discoveries are often made possible by sophisticated scientific analysis that allows us to see inside mummies without ever disturbing their wraps. You're about to explore the incredible ways modern science is peering into the past, revealing intimate details about ancient lives and deaths, all with respect and without unwrapping a single bandage. You've seen how modern archaeological discoveries continue to unearth new physical evidence about mummification, but perhaps even more revolutionary is how science is now peering inside these ancient remains, revealing incredible details without ever disturbing their wraps. You're about to discover the marvel of Humorous scientific analysis, how non-invasive techniques are allowing us to understand mummies like never before. A mainstream historical fact is that modern medical imaging technologies, particularly CT-computed tomography scans and X-rays, have revolutionized the study of mummies. Instead of the destructive process of unwrapping, which was common in earlier centuries and often damaged the fragile remains, scientists can now create detailed 3D images of the mummy's internal structure. Imagine seeing every bone, every organ, every amulet nestled within the layers of linen, all without touching the ancient fabric. It's like having X-ray vision, but for history. CT scans generate thousands of cross-sectional images, which are then compiled by a computer to create a comprehensive digital model of the entire mummy. This allows researchers to 1. Identify the deceased, determine age at death, sex, and sometimes even specific physical characteristics that can help identify known individuals. 2. Examine the mummification process. Observe the internal state of the organs or lack thereof, the presence of packing materials, and the types of amulets and jewelry placed within the bandages. They can even see the remnants of the brain or the path of the brain hooked through the nostril. 3. Detect diseases and injuries. Look for signs of ancient ailments, broken bones, dental problems, or evidence of surgical procedures. This offers incredible insights into ancient health and medical practices. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit beyond CT scans. Researchers also use techniques like mass spectrometry to analyze tiny samples of the embalming resins and materials. This allows them to identify the specific chemical compounds used, revealing the sophisticated recipes and trade networks involved in acquiring exotic ingredients. Imagine being able to tell that a pharaoh's mummy was treated with resin from a tree found thousands of miles away. You can almost picture an ancient embalmer, meticulously sourcing ingredients from across the known world, perhaps grumbling, "This frankincense better be worth the trouble. Pharaoh has very sensitive skin, even after death." This microanalysis provides a chemical fingerprint of ancient practices. The beauty of these non-invasive techniques is that they preserve the mummy intact for future generations and for further study using even more advanced technologies yet to be invented. It's a respectful approach that acknowledges the mummy as both a scientific specimen and a human remain. Historians still argue whether the ethical imperative to keep mummies wrapped and undisturbed outweighs the potential knowledge that could be gained from a full, physical autopsy, especially for mummies that are already partially damaged. It's a delicate balance between the pursuit of knowledge and the respect for the dead. These advanced analyses are not just academic exercises. They are yielding profound insights into ancient Egyptian life and to death that simply weren't possible before. From diet to disease, from social status to surgical skill. The mummies are speaking to us silently through the language of science. You're about to delve deeper into these revelations, uncovering the surprising medical insights that these ancient remains offer, shedding light on the health challenges and surprising resilience of a civilization long past. You've marveled at the technological wizardry that allows us to virtually peer inside mummies. But these incredible images aren't just fascinating pictures. They're rich data sets yielding profound insights, particularly in the realm of ancient health and disease. You're about to discover the surprising medical insight gleaned from a mummified remains, revealing the ailments and resilience of people who lived thousands of years ago. A mainstream historical fact is that scientific analysis of mummies has provided invaluable information about the health conditions prevalent in ancient Egypt. Unlike skeletal remains, mummies preserve soft tissues, allowing for the identification of diseases that wouldn't leave a trace on bone. For instance, CT scans have revealed evidence of atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries in numerous mummies, even in young individuals. This suggests that cardiovascular disease, often considered a modern affliction, was surprisingly common among the ancient elite, perhaps linked to a rich diet or genetic predispositions. Imagine finding signs of heart disease in a pharaoh who lived 3,000 years ago. It's a direct connection to human vulnerability across millennia. Beyond heart disease, mummies have shown evidence of a wide range of conditions. Parasitic infections, such as schistosomiasis bilharzia, were widespread, likely due to contaminated water from the Nile. Tuberculosis, arthritis, and various forms of cancer have also been identified. Dental health, for many, was notoriously poor, with evidence of severe wear from gritty food, abscesses, and cavities. This often led to significant pain and infection, suggesting that ancient Egyptian dentists, if they existed in a formal capacity, had their work cut out for them. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some mummies have revealed surprising signs of successful ancient surgeries or medical interventions. For example, evidence of well-healed bone fractures, sometimes even with splints still in place, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of orthopedics. There are even tantalizing hints of ancient brain surgery trepanation. Though evidence for survival after such procedures is debated, you can almost picture an ancient surgeon, a bit like a bewildered modern doctor, trying to explain to a patient, "Right, we're going to drill a hole in your skull. Don't worry, it's for good luck and to let out the bad spirits. Mostly good luck." It reminds us that ancient medicine, while often rudimentary by our standards, was capable of remarkable feats. The study of ancient pathology through mummies isn't just about cataloging diseases. It provides context for understanding ancient diets, lifestyles, and environmental factors. By examining a large number of mummies from different social strata and time periods, researchers can track the evolution of diseases and health trends across millennia. Historians still argue whether the medical conditions observed in mummies accurately reflect the general health of the entire ancient Egyptian population, or if they are skewed towards the elite who could afford mummification, potentially revealing more about the diseases of affluence rather than the common populace. It's a debate about the representativeness of the evidence and the limitations of our sample size. These medical insights offer a profound connection to the people of ancient Egypt, reminding us that despite their different beliefs and technologies, they faced many of the same physical challenges as we do today. But as we gain more and more knowledge from these ancient remains, new ethical considerations inevitably arise. You're about to delve into the delicate balance of preserving the past and the complex ethical dilemmas that come with studying human remains from millennia ago. You've seen the incredible medical insights that mummies offer, transforming them from silent relics into eloquent witnesses of ancient health. But as our scientific capabilities grow, so does our responsibility. This brings us to a crucial and often sensitive topic: preserving the past and the complex ethical dilemmas that arise when studying human remains from millennia ago. A mainstream historical fact is that there is an ongoing global debate about the ethical treatment of human remains from archaeological contexts, including mummies. For centuries, Mummies were often viewed primarily as curiosities or scientific specimens, leading to practices like unwrapping them in public spectacles or displaying them without adequate cultural context or respect. Modern archaeological and museum practices have largely moved away from these approaches, recognizing mummies not just as objects of study, but as the remains of individuals who were once living people with their own beliefs about death and the afterlife. The core of the dilemma lies in balancing the pursuit of scientific knowledge and historical understanding with the imperative to respect the deceased and the cultural heritage they represent. Many indigenous cultures, whose ancestors' remains are often held in Western museums, advocate for repatriation and reburial, viewing the display or study of their ancestors as deeply disrespectful. For ancient Egyptian mummies, while a direct modern descendant community isn't as easily identifiable, the principle of respect for the dead's spiritual journey remains paramount for many. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some very rare instances, there have been discussions or even attempts at virtual reburial or digital repatriation, where highly detailed 3D scans and data of mummies are made available for scientific study, while the physical remains are reinterred or kept in culturally appropriate storage, inaccessible for public view. This innovative approach attempts to satisfy both scientific curiosity and ethical concerns. You can almost imagine a mummy digitally soaring through a virtual museum, thinking, much better. All the glory, none of the drafty display cases. This illustrates the creative solutions being explored in this ethical landscape. Museums and research institutions are increasingly adopting stricter ethical guidelines. This includes prioritizing non-invasive study techniques like the CT scanning we just discussed, ensuring respectful storage conditions, and engaging in careful consultation with stakeholders, including Egyptian authorities, about the display and study of their heritage. The goal is to maximize scientific benefit while minimizing cultural offense and ensuring the long-term preservation of these irreplaceable remains. Historians still argue whether the current ethical guidelines for the study and display of mummies go far enough to address past wrongs and truly respect the deceased, or if they sometimes impede valuable scientific research that could provide crucial insights into ancient life and human history. It's a fundamental tension between reverence and knowledge. The future of mummy studies lies in this careful navigation of ethical boundaries. It's about understanding that these ancient individuals chose a specific path for their eternal rest. And while we seek to learn from their legacy, we must do so with profound respect for their journey. And speaking of journey, these magnificent mummies, despite the debates surrounding them, continue to be global sensations. You're about to explore their enduring appeal, their role as Akan museum stars, and why they continue to captivate audiences around the world, bridging millennia with their silent presence. You've just considered the profound ethical considerations that shape the modern study of mummies. Despite these complex debates, or perhaps because of the deeper understanding they foster, mummies continue to hold an undeniable allure, transforming them into veritable modern museum stars that captivate audiences around the globe. You're about to explore their enduring appeal and why these silent ancient figures continue to draw millions of visitors. A mainstream historical fact is that mummies, particularly ancient Egyptian ones, are among the most popular and iconic exhibits in museums worldwide. From the British Museum in London to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and, of course, the Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Their presence consistently draws large crowds. Imagine standing before a sarcophagus, knowing that within lies a person who walked the earth thousands of years ago, a tangible link to a civilization long past. This direct, visceral connection to antiquity is incredibly powerful. They aren't just artifacts, they are human remains, prompting contemplation about life, death, and eternity. Their appeal lies in several factors. Firstly, their sheer age and the incredible feat of their preservation evoke a sense of wonder. How did people without modern technology manage to preserve a body for millennia? Secondly, they offer a direct, physical connection to a culture that often feels mythical and distant, yet so influential. Seeing a mummy's face, even through layers of wraps or a death mask, makes the abstract concept of ancient Egypt startlingly real. Thirdly, there's an inherent human fascination with death and the unknown, and mummies embody these mysteries perfectly. They are windows into ancient funerary beliefs, rituals, and the universal human quest for immortality. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The public fascination with mummies sometimes extends beyond serious academic study. There have been instances, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries, of mummy unwrapping parties held in private homes or museums. Grotesque spectacles that thankfully are now widely condemned and considered deeply unethical. Imagine attending a social gathering where the main entertainment is the public unwrapping of human remains. Thankfully, such practices are relegated to the dark corners of history books. This demonstrates how wildly public perception and scientific ethics have evolved regarding these ancient individuals. It's a reminder of a time when the boundary between scientific inquiry and morbid entertainment was far blurrier. Today, museums approach the display of mummies with much greater sensitivity and educational intent. Exhibits are carefully designed to provide context, explain the mummification process, discuss ancient Egyptian beliefs, and highlight the scientific insights gained from modern analysis, all while treating the remains with dignity. Interactive displays, 3D renderings, and detailed informational panels help to bring the story of the mummy and its culture to life, transforming what was once a mere curiosity into a profound educational experience. Historians still argue whether the act of displaying human remains, even with the utmost respect and educational context, inherently clashes with the deceased's original intention for eternal rest, or if their public presence serves a greater good by fostering understanding and appreciation for ancient cultures. It's a continuous ethical tightrope walk for curators and institutions. The enduring legacy of mummies, both in their physical form and in the knowledge they impart, continues to shape our understanding of ancient Egypt. They are more than just preserved bodies. They are tangible testaments to a civilization's profound belief in the afterlife and their remarkable ingenuity in pursuing it. And this quest for immortality, embodied in every linen wrap form, has left an enduring legacy that still resonates deeply with us today. You've witnessed the global appeal of mummies as museum stars, drawing us into their ancient world. Their silent presence speaks volumes. But what exactly is their lasting message? It's the profound and powerful story of the ancient Egyptians' enduring legacy, immortality's quest. Their obsession with overcoming death shaped their entire civilization, leaving an indelible mark on history and influencing ideas about the afterlife across cultures. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Egyptians' elaborate mummification practices and their construction of monumental tombs like the pyramids were fundamentally driven by their unwavering belief in the afterlife and the necessity of preserving the body for eternal existence. This wasn't just a casual hope. It was a deeply ingrained spiritual and cultural imperative. They believed in the K life force, the Bia personality, soul, and the Ag, a resurrected, enlightened spirit, all of which required the physical body as an anchor point to thrive in the duat. Their entire society, from their economy to their art, was meticulously organized around this central quest for immortality. Their vision of the afterlife wasn't a shadowy void. It was a vibrant, active realm, the field of reeds, a perfected version of their earthly existence where they could live eternally, reunited with loved ones and partaking in divine abundance. Mummification was simply the practical means to achieve this glorious destiny. It was their way of cheating death, of ensuring continuity beyond the grave. Imagine building your entire life, your entire society, around the singular goal of living forever, not just spiritually, but in a tangible form. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The meticulous care given to preserving the deceased extended to even the smallest details, sometimes even attempting to replicate the sense of life. While largely speculative, some researchers have explored the possibility that certain embalming resins and oils were chosen not just for preservation, but to evoke specific, pleasant aromas that the deceased would have enjoyed in life, further enhancing their comfort in the afterlife. You can almost imagine an ancient embalmer, perhaps holding a scented cloth to a finished mummy, thinking, perfect pharaoh will still smell like his favorite lotus blossoms in the afterlife. No one wants to spend eternity smelling like old natron. This attention to sensory detail, even for the dead, is a fascinating peek into their holistic approach to eternal well-being. The Egyptian concept of the afterlife and the methods they developed to achieve it profoundly influenced later cultures, particularly the Greeks and Romans, and indirectly contributed to broader Western philosophical and religious thought about the soul, the body, and the journey after death. While their specific rituals weren't directly copied, the idea of preserving the body for an immortal existence resonated. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian emphasis on physical preservation for the afterlife was unique in its intensity among ancient civilizations, or if it represents a more universal human desire for continuity that manifested differently in other cultures. It's a debate about the specificity of culture versus the universality of human longing. Ultimately, the mummies stand as a testament to humanity's oldest and most profound aspiration to defy mortality. They are not just artifacts. They are embodiments of a civilization's deepest hopes and fears. Their unwavering belief that death was not an end, but merely a transition to an even grander existence. Their quest for immortality, painstakingly executed through the art of mummification, continues to inspire awe and curiosity, inviting us to ponder our own mortality and the enduring human spirit. And as we conclude our journey through the more serious aspects of mummification, it's time to lighten the mood a little and reflect on some of the genuinely amusing and quirky side notes of this ancient practice. You've traveled through the serious and profound aspects of ancient Egyptian mummification, from the complex rituals to the modern ethical debates. But let's not forget that even in the face of death, ancient Egyptians, like us, had their moments of quirky ingenuity and accidental humor. It's time to lighten the mood and reflect on the humorous side of ancient Egyptian mummification, highlighting some of the more unusual or surprisingly relatable aspects of this ancient practice. A mainstream historical fact, often overlooked in serious studies, is that despite the rigid formality of mummification, there were inevitably moments of human error, improvisation, or simply the absurd. For example, while the brain was generally discarded, archaeologists occasionally find remnants of brain matter that suggest not every brain removal was 100% successful. You can almost picture an apprentice embalmer trying to explain to his master, "But I swore I got it all. Master, it was very gelatinous." Or the occasional finding of a foreign object accidentally left in a mummy, perhaps a forgotten tool, a lost earring, or even a piece of an embalmer's lunch. It reminds us that even highly ritualized processes are carried out by fallible humans. Remember that quirky tidbit about the variable contents of animal mummies, sometimes filled with just a few bones or even straw. That's a classic example of ancient Egyptian pragmatism meeting religious demand. Imagine the thriving market for sacred animal mummies and the pressure on embalmers to meet quotas. Quick, we need 50 more ibis mummies by sundown. Just throw in a feather and some sand. No one will know the difference in the afterlife. This hints at a touch of ancient consumerism and perhaps even a bit of good-natured scamming, even in the context of sacred offerings. Here's a particularly amusing fringe tidbit that borders on the bizarre. In some cases, to make the mummies look more lifelike or plump, especially after the dehydrating effects of natron, embalmers would occasionally pack the limbs and face with various materials like linen scraps, sawdust, mud, or even sand. Imagine a mummy's face being subtly or not so subtly enhanced with a bit of ancient stuffing to fill out the cheeks. You can almost hear an ancient embalmer critically examining his work. A bit gaunt. Let's give him a bit more. Eternal plumpness around the jowls. He was always so proud of his robust constitution in life. This desire for an aesthetically pleasing mummy, even if it meant a bit of stuffing, adds a surprisingly human, almost vain, touch to the process. It's the ancient equivalent of using Photoshop to look good for your eternal portrait. Another amusing thought, the sheer complexity of some of the spells and instructions in the Book of the Dead meant to guide the deceased through the afterlife. They were so intricate, with specific incantations for every demon and every gate, that you almost wonder if the deceased ever got halfway through and thought, oh, for the love of Ra, I forgot the password for the gate of the sixth hour. Can I just skip ahead to the field of reeds? Please, it paints a picture of a bureaucracy, even in the divine realm, and the deceased trying their best to navigate it with their magical cheat sheet. Historians still argue whether the complexity of these funerary texts was designed to genuinely guide the deceased through a perilous journey, to assert priestly authority and knowledge, or simply reflected a cultural enjoyment of intricate magical systems. It's a debate between spiritual aid, power dynamics, and a hint of playful intellectualism. So, while mummification was a profoundly serious and spiritual undertaking, it also had its moments of human imperfection, clever workaround, and even touches of the utterly absurd. These lighter notes remind us that the ancient Egyptians, despite their incredible achievements and deep beliefs, were still human, with their own quirks, challenges, and occasional slips of the hand. They pursued immortality with dedication, but perhaps also with a knowing chuckle at some of the stranger aspects of their eternal preparations. Now, as the echoes of ancient history fade and the last whispers of the Nile drift away, allow yourself to slowly drift too. The journey through the sands of time, exploring the meticulous and sometimes humorous world of ancient Egyptian mummification, draws to a close. Feel the gentle warmth of your bed, the soft give of your pillow beneath your head. Let any lingering thoughts about canopic jars or natron baths gently float away, like dust motes dancing in a final ray of moonlight. Your mind, now quiet and content, is ready to embrace the tranquility of sleep. There are no more long processions to attend, no more ancient spells to memorize, just the steady rhythm of your own breath, a calming presence in the stillness. Allow your muscles to relax, your eyelids to grow heavy. The secrets of the pharaohs are safe for another night, nestled deep in the annals of history and in the quiet corners of your imagination. Rest easy now, knowing that even in the quest for eternity, a little bit of humor can always be found. All is well, and the world is peaceful. Just breathe and let go. Sweet dreams.